Thank you, Michael. Up next, I'd like to introduce our panel on how recent MIT grads are using AI to make an impact. This group of panelists, moderated by Professor Duane of the MIT Electrical Engineering and Computer Science Department, have all graduated from the MIT Leaders for Global Operations program within the past 3 years. I'm excited to hear about the challenges they faced and the impact they've had implementing AI in manufacturing and operations since graduation. So we'll give them a couple minutes to get their mics on, but please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
They're a close cohort. They don't want to, leave anybody behind. Part of the LGO culture. Okay, great to see folks again. You've heard a couple of times about the LGO program and its intersection with MIMO. We have a unique panel here with 3 relatively recent graduates of LGO, several of whom were participants in early stages of this MIMO concept. Now they're out as young leaders in industry. And we thought it'd be really interesting to hear a little bit about their experience, especially in their current roles, either applying machine learning in AI and operation or in manufacturing and operations, or how they got to their current roles and maybe how that intersected with things that they learned or participated in while here at MIT. So I think what we'll start with is just self-introductions and hear a little bit about your current role, current company, how you got there, and maybe dive in briefly to some kind of applications or challenges of AI in manufacturing and operations.
Hi, I'm Suzie Rawden. I'm an LGO class of 2021 graduate, and I'm the Director of Supply Chain Digital Strategy and Deployment for DePuy Synthes, which is the orthopedics company of J&J. In my current role, I lead a team that is responsible for kind of on the softer side, developing the strategy and roadmap for our digital portfolio, which includes everything from your business intelligence solution to Gen AI, more traditional machine learning, and things like AR, VR applications. So it's a really exciting space to be, spans the gamut. We also are responsible for building the digital acumen of the organization, so bringing everybody along for the journey and what type of reskilling we need for people with different aspirations in the business, whether it's preparing people to be, business leaders of this technology or people who want to reskill from a technical perspective. And then we also do deploy solutions as well. So we've carved out a little niche for ourselves in supply chain to be building out solutions.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Philipp Simons, LGO class of 22, so right in the middle here. I had a somewhat unique experience in LGO because I was my year's only PhD and MBA, and my PhD was in material science and engineering, so I'm a ceramicist, which has a whole lot to do with data science. But funny enough, it was interesting to see Wojciech this morning because we actually had a collaboration with him when I was there where we were trying to automate material synthesis, where our lab did a lot of the brought the know-how on the materials, and Wojciech's team, as you saw, brought the experience on how you can actually automate that at scale and ideally do sort of a closed loop material synthesis process. So I always had an interest on the intersection between sort of how you make physical stuff, and I guess that's how I ended up in material science, but then also the data that comes with that, and I think that's sort of the other big overlap with the PhD, right? Like you generate way more data than you'd like, and you need to somehow analyze and understand that and then draw your conclusions. And then I towards the end of my PhD, I got to join LGO, and through LGO, I then joined Amgen full-time after I graduated. And there I was part of a team that's called Operations Transformation and Digital Strategy, or OTDS. Amgen loves long acronyms that really don't say anything. And so the important part there is the digital strategy side. So I joined Amgen at a very interesting time because we actually just built 2 new factories, a drug substance plant, which basically makes the molecules, the active pharmaceutical ingredient of our drugs, and then a second plant that packages those drugs into a device, usually an injection device, and then sort of wraps it in a box and all that. And so my responsibility there was with this second packaging plant to really use IoT, machine learning, all those fancy things to drive uptime. So we heard a lot about predictive maintenance, about sort of real-time analytics. I was essentially in charge of driving how we can do that sort of from scratch in a new site. So that was really exciting, and that plant actually got FDA approval in February this year. So it's up and running now. Also was a super fast project. They managed to build the whole site in 21 months from like groundbreaking to FDA approval. And really the goal is there, or was, and has been sort of the implementation is to really be the most digitally advanced factory, where we really get all kinds of very high-speed data from the equipment and leverage that to understand, is our equipment about to break? Do we have issues with our processes? And then use that information to increase our productivity at the end.
Cool, and I'm Josh Weisberg, so I'm an LGO 23, so I just graduated from the program last May. And I was very involved with MIMO throughout my time, so I got to do a lot of work on implementation of AI and really like what does the journey look like from building a data culture to a data-driven decision making through specific use cases of AI and machine learning. And now after school, I went to a factory with Rebuild Manufacturing out in Denver. It's a thermoplastics factory, thermoplastics composites. And what's really cool is this factory is really at the beginning of their journey. So I'm kind of seeing that model that I did a lot of work on in my time with at MIT with MIMO, kind of seeing it through from the very beginning. And we actually had an LGO intern at the factory who was in basically my position before I started, kind of proving it out. If we start to collect data, and I really mean start to collect data on our machines, on our processes, on our quality, what's important and where could we go? And now I've taken it and working on expanding it to the whole factory, doing the instrumentation, telemetry, inspection, analytics, making sure that we gather all that data and then use it for not just continuous improvement, but product development as well. And it's like a lot of our presenters have said earlier today, data. That's one of the biggest things. You just got to collect a lot of it, make sure it's covers your full scope and such. And some of the, I don't know if it's challenges, but some of that work, especially over the first few months since I graduated, has included getting down into the PLC code, the HMI code of our machines, making modifications so that we can collect not just the data off an instrument, but the context. So what kind of part are we working on? What's the serial number? Creating a serialization system for the whole factory. All that to make sure, sooner we're collecting it, the sooner we can reach that, point of return where we have enough data to build a model. So that's really been the focus so far.
Fantastic. So we have a nice cross-section here of both different industries, but also different kinds of scale of, I guess, AI and ML projects, from individual deployment kinds of things to strategy, and even trying to think about how to build, the organization's capability. I was curious about your experiences with some of the kinds of both opportunities, but especially the challenges we've heard about throughout the day. and what were some of the biggest challenges you've encountered, and maybe most surprising challenges, because you'd been involved in things like MIMO beforehand. I'm really curious, what surprised you in terms of some of these kinds of deployments and efforts?
So I would say one of my biggest surprises is that the change management, like today we focused a lot on how we can connect the business with the technology team to define the use case. But I've found, J&J was founded during the second industrial revolution. It's a digitally non-native company, right? So there's also a huge change management on the technical side as well to be setting up the proper architecture. I mean, we saw these architecture slides up here, and getting to that point where you've aligned on an architecture that makes sense, that you've successfully moved into the cloud, everyone's is following you along on that journey. That's also been a change management challenge as well. And I think the pace of change on that side of things is also a challenge in a large company like J&J, where, especially in healthcare, where we're not used to change being so quick.
Yeah, 100% agree with Suzie. I mean, also being in a regulated industry or in the same regulated industry, like the rate of, or the willingness to adapt is slow. I think the second thing I would add is, for me, it's been really around data quality, specifically in the predictive maintenance space, right? So I think we heard a talk before on really overlaying what happens operationally, like understanding what does the machine do, does it break, why did it break, all that information, and overlaying that with all the automation data that you mentioned, right? Like understanding, okay, I don't know, what was the actual production step? What did the machine physically do at the time that it broke? And then filtering out all the noise there. So my favorite example of predictive maintenance, where sort of, I think we heard this morning too, like correlation isn't causation, right? So my favorite example is that we always saw that when something broke, the main error that we always get from the machine is a door open. And so first we were like, okay, that's the perfect predictor. Every time something breaks, the door is open. Or that's a very common sort of case, but it's sort of the other way around, right? Like the door opens because something is broken. You have to look into the machine and fix it. And so like if you analyze the data like that, and you start seeing a lot of that. And then the other example, I think, is how do you get good data, good operational data, where you rely on the human, right? Like it's everything that's automated. You can pull all the history of what the machine did, what signal did the control system send. But when something broke, you need a human to enter the information of what broke and why and how did we fix it. That's the information I need to do good predictive and ideally prescriptive maintenance. But the sort of the discipline that you need on the shop floor to actually enter that data is really, really hard. Again, also from a change management perspective, to instill. And that's something that I think will take forever. And you can have the fanciest machine learning and general whatnot. If you don't have good data, I mean, garbage in, garbage out is sort of the well-known concept, right? So I think that to me, it was the hardest part, is like, how do you get that good data? And it also takes a lot of time, similar to the change management, right? Like if we start collecting really disciplined data now, we can probably only start doing good predictive maintenance 3 or 4 years from now, because these events are so rare.
Yeah, so I think there's two things that have kind of surprised me. One is digital touches everything. And what I mean by that is, when you're in the data collection phase and you're getting into machine code and you're putting into the innards of a machine to add an instrument of some sort, so many opportunities pop up. It might be, hey, there's a module that came with this machine that we haven't been using. It's an opportunity could actually be very helpful. Or other continuous improvement opportunities in quality, safety, efficiency, all sorts of things that you're touching every group in the factory inherently, because you're collecting data on what they're doing. And so there's been a lot of opportunities, which I don't want to say have distracted me from the digital purpose, because obviously I'm working them, I'm raising them to the group because they're value add, but have made the progress to the digital goal a little slower. The second piece is, we've all, I'm sure, experienced the problem of ROI, as has been mentioned earlier in the day. Collecting data is not free, and so how do you justify that cost? It's difficult, because if you knew what exactly you were going to get out of collecting that data, you wouldn't need to collect it. I've spent a lot of my time, talking to others about the value, what we're trying to get out of a collection. And I actually, I kind of reached a good milestone about a month ago where I got together with the whole team. We were doing our prioritization for the year, and everybody agreed, with my prior convincing, that getting the instrumentation, getting the data collection was top priority. This was going to be the highest value thing. And I said, all right, this is great. Let's hit the ground. Next week we're going to get out there and we're going to introduce our new inspection process to start collecting this next piece of data. And they said, well, yes, we all agree that's very important, but it's going to take a minute to actually learn anything from the model. So let's do all this other stuff first. And so it's kind of the second order thing now of everyone agrees there's value, but because it's not an immediate return, they're a little bit hesitant. And granted, there are, of course, lots of competing priorities and other important things. But if we don't start collecting the data now, we're always going to have to do that waiting period. So that's an interesting new challenge.
One of the things, well, those are interesting challenges. A couple of surprises, a couple of things that perhaps are not surprising, the importance of data and so on. Thinking back to this morning's sessions, and especially Prakash's presentation on engineering-built AI, you folks are in kind of a unique program that, you're getting both. You've got both an MBA and an engineering master's degree. So you're both engineers and you're leaders and managers. And I'm curious about some of the challenges that you faced. To what degree, what were the approaches you used to overcome them? And to what degree were they informed by either or both of that engineering mindset or the sort of the management mindset?
So, I can start again, I guess. Maybe this is the pattern.
It's a linear pipeline.
Linear pipeline. But for me, the LGO program was the opportunity to build that digital skill set. So prior to LGO, I had worked for 3 years as an R&D chemist at material science startups in the Boston area, and then I spent 4 years working at an automotive parts supplier also in the Boston area, and had the opportunity with them to spend 2 years in mainland China leading a tech transfer to start up a new manufacturing facility. And so I think it's been, or even too, if I was just talking to my boss yesterday and he was like, well, I picked you for this role because you had both. You had that strong supply chain knowledge and you have strong digital knowledge, and you can help be the connector between those two worlds. So I feel like, and that has kind of been the value proposition of the LGO program, is at the intersection of technology and business, or engineering and business. And I guess I feel like the program did help equip me to enter in this environment where I'm trying to function and serve as that connector between those two worlds, to help them understand each other so we can drive value for the company and our patients.
But before we go to the next one, I've had a lot of interactions with a faculty member here at MIT who's a sociologist. And one of the questions she often asks after she's heard an answer is, can you give me a specific example? So I'm really curious if there's a specific example maybe you could allude to on how that dual engineering and management, maybe in your current role at J&J, has changed, met one of those challenges.
Sure. So I mean, I think some of the examples can include just, sometimes I'll be in a position to be talking about a digital solution, and I can see, my business partner is, looking at me a little like dead in the eyes and be like, well, do you really understand our challenge here? Even if we find out that, like, let's say we're looking at scrap, like, even if we find out that, there's something wrong with a part because it's in the high end of our tolerance range, like, how am I supposed to fix it? And I'm like, well, I know that this is a challenge, right? Because you agreed upon the spec with the supplier, so it's this whole complicated thing to go back and say, actually, we found that at the higher end of the spec, it's creating bad parts. Can you tighten the spec? Like, I know that's something you would have to work through if you discovered this not using AI ML tools, and there could be other insights that we can find. So it's just being able to engage in those discussions where you're being challenged, if you can draw on your past experience in that area, and acknowledge that you understand that perspective as well, you can kind of help bring people along on the journey. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, so maybe even reflecting on both parts of the question, if that's coming now, Philip, both, sort of that synthesis of engineering and engineering-led AI and ML implementations, and any examples sort of related to that synthesis of both halves of your brain there.
Yeah, so I would argue sort of almost the same as what you were saying. I like Prakash's analogy of being a translator, right? Like that's how I normally feel too. A great example, sort of when I could really nerd out, but really also be sort of hopefully drive value for the company too, was obviously like predictive maintenance in pharma is something it's hard to experiment, right? Like we can't break our equipment or anything like that. To see what does it look like when it fails. But at the same time, without knowing what a failure looks like, you can't really predict a failure, or at least specific types of failure. So I had actually a really cool experience where I think both of those skill sets that you mentioned came in. Was we ended up building a little replica of a packaging machine in a lab based on essentially a design that I suggested, where we literally went on Amazon, bought like a camshaft for a lawnmower, attached that to a motor to see how can motors fail essentially that drive sort of large, complex mechanical machines. And so it was very much about like I literally stood in the lab, built something. But at the same time, it was also, once we had that, we had a prototype, and we could test our entire new data collection platform based on that, and it turned out to be a huge value driver because we were, as I said before, we were building the factory while we were also developing those digital tools. So there was no way to try things out live. So this replica actually turned out to be sort of an experiment that ended up being sort of the driver for that enabled a multi-million-dollar investment into a digital capability. So I thought that was a really cool one. And I like every time I go into this lab, I still like. I love sort of the setup that we built, but it's also like the scale of impact that had. I thought was pretty awesome.
Just fascinating. In this digital world, you had a physical twin that you could torture instead.
Yeah, and I mean, somebody said, right, like nothing can, like even the best sort of simulated data doesn't come close to something physical. And it also sort of similar to your question, right, like what surprised us, like that was able to preempt a lot of surprises, because what turned like one big problem in data that we were capturing that we had just no idea about, and if we had generated a bunch of sort of time series data with a Gen AI, we wouldn't have come up with that either, was that we didn't dare to think or didn't think about the temperature of the equipment, and that's both the temperature of the equipment and the room temperature, right? So like of course when something breaks, it heats up, or tends to if it's a mechanical piece of equipment, but funny enough, we forgot that like in our initial analysis that also the room temperature can swing wildly. And so if you just monitor temperature and see a spike of 5 or 10 degrees Celsius, it turned out half of those were just the AC, not like, I think somebody was talking about Southern California. That lab was also in Southern California. The AC wasn't able to keep up with the heat outside, and so that's why the engine got hot. There wasn't anything wrong with it. So those were like the kinds of things we could preempt with a physical piece of equipment.
Yeah, Josh.
Yeah. Sorry, can you repeat?
Yeah, the question. You're an engineer and
Right.
A leader in a manufacturing. I'm curious about, places where the synthesis or both of those dual perspectives have been critical.
Yeah, so for me, it's, and LGO, of course, being an operations-focused program, it's really about identifying the bottleneck for the business and seeing where, there's all these opportunities that we can go tackle. Where is it going to be the most impactful first? And so I'll give a specific example. We notice a spike in scrap rates whenever we do a changeover in our factory, and our operators, they're very, very skilled. They do a lot of fine tuning to deal with the upstream variation that comes to them. And so that's part of it, right? And by getting this analytics in place, we're hoping to help reduce that burden and help them know how to tune with the things that are coming their way and upstream inspections to kind of help reduce that impact. But there's another piece, which is we have a lot of trouble with changeovers in our trimming of our parts. And so we found that, yes, we know the analytics we want to do are going to be impactful, but we don't even get that quality feedback for the current batch until we address the changeover challenges in our trim cell. And a lot of that comes from, there's room for improvement in the fixtures that we use. And so, having the ability to kind of change my hat for a moment and say, I'm going to put my digital goals aside because they'd be impactful, but they'll be more impactful if we get quicker quality feedback, immediately on a changeover instead of waiting for the upstream trim to tune itself first. And as an engineer, I'll go work with the engineering team to address the fixture improvements first, get that, reduce that scrap first, and then we'll know, is the part good because of the upstream variation, or is it bad because of the upstream variation, or bad because of the trim challenges?
So I'm going to ask one more question, but then we'll have at least a couple of minutes for the audience. So be thinking of your questions for these folks as well. I think Suzie, earlier you mentioned one of the challenges is sort of the fast pace of change of this AI, machine learning sort of technology. And I'm curious, how that's affecting both the work you do at your company, what approaches you're doing to deal with that fast pace of change, and where do you see things going with that fast pace of change in the coming few years, including the kind of role and impact on the kind of role that you have in your company?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost is a culture change and developing that growth mindset of, we're not going to be building technical architecture that's going to, stay the same for, a decade or decades. And I think it's moving in, like, fully adopting, right? Like, I would say J&J is somewhere between the waterfall and agile methodology, right? So moving more fully into that agile development. I think another piece of that change is around kind of continuing to reframe the decision around make versus buy. So I would say we're in the past there were some custom solutions or even maybe model development was something that, we looked at in-house, and I would say now it's, what models can we be leveraging? How can we take these models and apply them to our use cases? and continually, just refreshing make versus buy. What makes sense here for us? Yeah.
Yeah, what resonates with some of the things we heard from the McKinsey study. Yeah. Philipp.
Yeah, so I would say in terms of approaches, like the culture definitely is a big one. The other is obviously where like there's so much changing, but it's also sometimes important to remember what's staying the same. So we talked when we met before this panel, we talked a lot about like the hype, right? So clearly, like Gen AI is changing a lot of the things that we're doing, and for the better, right? Like I think we can be much more productive. We have much more powerful algorithms at our fingertips. But it's also important to remember when to use them and when not to use them, right? Like when, again, in my world of predictive maintenance, we've been essentially holding together sort of a classic statistical process control algorithm next to an autoencoder. And I would argue that in many cases, a good statistical sort of algorithm that builds in a lot of understanding of what does this machine actually do is way more powerful than just sort of throwing all the compute in the world at a problem without understanding what's going on. So I think the very first talk today talked about it's so important to frame the problem, and I think that's something to always do. But then also embrace sort of the new opportunities, right? You can't afford to stand still. You can't afford to just keep using linear regression when you have really powerful ML tools at your fingertips. But don't forget sort of the basics. I would say is very important.
Yeah, exactly. I would echo the same things as Philipp. Is what's really important is being pulled by my customers at the factory, my engineering leader and my production leader and quality, and for them to tell me what the problems are, and then all I really have to do is stay versed on the toolbox and what's available, and make sure that I have something that will work with a reasonable cost and time of implementation. But I try, I stay up to date on what's out there and what's available, but I'm not necessarily distracted by the hype because I want to make them aware of what I can use, but not push anything on them because they have very busy, very full plates and want to see the quick, understandable impact first and foremost.
So, any questions from the audience?
Yeah, so I'm lucky enough to work with a variety of companies that are working to digitize their manufacturing operations. And the first problem always is we didn't collect any of the data we need, which is fine, right? But the second problem almost always is we collected all of the data and we have no idea how to get the actual insight we want out of this mound of junk that we have now. So could you talk a bit about how you actually designed the data collection to solve the business problems you want to solve, and the extent that the LGO program and its sort of dual nature helps you address those types of problems?
Yeah, I think for us, the most important thing, it's been kind of like an evolution, several stages. So the first thing we've been focused on collecting is basic functionality. How do we make sure, what data do we need to collect to make sure that all of the equipment is operating how we expect it to operate? So it might not be right, it might not be optimal, but at least we enter a setting and we achieve that setting. And so we chose a model cell, one place to start and focus, and instrumented every single thing we could think of. And then we knew from that what was important, and what equipment might not be functioning, and then how should we scale that. So before we invest anything significant, find what's important, and then be ready to scale. And then the second thing after basic functionality is context. So labels are, of course, extremely important. One of the hardest things to get, so that's inspection data, quality data, serialization, and those are things that, besides obviously providing valuable complement to the machine data that comes off instrumentation, these things also just help us run the business. So the quality data that we capture gives valuable KPIs that we didn't have before. Or we had, but very manually in intense processes of collecting them. And so with those two pieces, the next thing is putting them together and being predictive. And eventually we want to get prescriptive. So I think it's about kind of establishing that journey of what problem are we trying to solve first. With some, obviously we take some leaps of faith because we want to make sure that we have all the data collected in case we need it down the road. And also, to the point of the presentations earlier, if we miss something that we can explain in our digital twin of the production line, then that's a significant reduction in the value of our investment if we can't capture that variation. And so, there's some piece of that, and then at each stage there's kind of a go, no go for, hey, we think we understand enough that we can replicate this across the factory. So the first time we implement serialization, and then we say, okay, we have this now, we've done it for one production line, we know there's going to be continuous improvement. When do we feel ready to replicate it? And just last week, one of the operators came to me and said, hey, like these labels, it would actually be super helpful if we serialized to the operators, if we serialized them a different way. And so, we're still learning on that. We haven't scaled that. So it's kind of like, starting small with an eye to hit the whole as soon as is reasonable so that we can accurately represent what's going on in whole, if that's helpful.
I would offer, so in the scenario where you have no data, my advice is to find that engineer who is thinking cutting edge and is saying, I've been trying to get the company to pay for these sensors for this many years because it'll really help us with process control. Find that thought leader and connect with them and partner with them to put together a use case for the company. In the case where you have a lot of data and you don't know what to do, start with the problem and then filter out what problem you think you can solve based on the data. I had that experience with my internship. They get, the J&J proposed a problem where they actually just didn't have the data to solve it. So I started to network with various different parts of the organization, their problem, their challenges, kind of the standard Lean Six Sigma toolkit, and finally found a problem where there was data. And then, I crossed my fingers and hoped I could complete a thesis with it, right? And had some promising proof of concept models that came out of it. But that would be my advice for kind of those two instances. And if it's a large company, look for innovation funding, look for potential for R&D tax credits from whatever, government bodies that there could be out there to get it funded if you're struggling with the ROI.
Thank you so much. Wonderful panel. I was just about to ask about that ROI and the value out of those small to mid-sized companies, but I know it gets talking about very large companies. When you step back, right, I think, from a business case and ROI and the value, can you guys just comment on it? And the second thing, Suzie, you mentioned about the challenges on the change management. That's great. How do you overcome? Because it's not an easy journey to address the larger community and given the size of your company and when it is started. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so across the range from SME to large company, a couple of the challenges is, I guess, establishing ROE and the ROI in the small case, and then change management in the large company.
Yeah, I guess the approach we kind of took is you've got your big five, safety, quality, cost, delivery. I'm missing one, but which of those is my focus, right? That's kind of the first step. For us, it was quality. And so it's very difficult to say, we think we can get here, especially, I've only been there 8 months, and so having to learn the process first. But we can at least say that, little by little, we do the basic functionality piece and we see, hey, we reduce scrap this much. So the next piece would be looking at predictive analytics with our labels. We think we can reduce it this much, and we get a sense, anecdotally from the experts on the floor, the operators, the production managers, the quality folks who can tell us, this problem occurs. Every month or every 2 months, we see this change in input material from our suppliers, and kind of just build that anecdotal case around the types of events that we're trying to prevent from happening, from disruptions to the production floor, because everyone can agree, from the operations to the finance and quality folks, that the goal is that we say we want to build X, and Y units of it, and we can just do that, right? Predictability is kind of the first thing we want to achieve. At least if we know what our scrap rate is going to be, that's so much better than not knowing what it's going to be. And so if we can capture those disruptions that are known, that's a significant return, even if not baked in the hard data to begin with.
I mean, maybe I'll use my MBA now and throw some buzzwords or some phrases at you. So, I mean, focus on the low-hanging fruits, right? Work on the stuff where you can make quick wins and really, really try and get something shipped really, really fast. I mean, sometimes you don't need like a serialization system or a data historian or something like that to get data. Maybe you can slap a Raspberry Pi to your machine and just collect a little bit of data and see, okay, there's a major source of loss on this equipment, and you can quickly get, 10% OEE back or something, right? And then like build those small success, or cheap but impactful success stories, and it unlocks capital, right? Like if you get capacity or higher quality or something like that back, like you're getting money back into the business. And use some of that to sort of start spinning the flywheel of really unlocking bigger and bigger investments, and at the same time get people to believe in it, right? Like if they see a result, they will follow.
And that is actually exactly how we started, with 2 Raspberry Pis, and they worked not well. I often.
I said it's an MBA suggestion.
But I often had to go out to the floor and unplug things and plug them back in again, and that did the trick most of the time, like 3 times a day. But it got the goal across of like, hey, this is helpful. Not everybody needs to know the details around. What goes into that Raspberry Pi and keeping it afloat. But it gets us started, and we are able to move into real historians and hardwired network and all the other things that make it more robust later.
Yeah. I would say from an ROI perspective, I think it goes back to some of the themes we've gone through today of having that partnership with the business and partnership with finance. Because at the end of the day, like I can't sign up for like a lot of the savings, like I don't own the delivery of, right? My business partners have targets that have been given to them for cost reduction, for inventory targets. So partnering with them to say, where do you have a problem that, has some sort of direct cost savings target where we think there can be a digital solution to help, and then getting the alignment of finance and working together on the business case for that. And then I would say too, on the change management from the technical perspective, I think it's a mix of like, in terms of assembling the team, it was very intentional of having, a number of people who had been with the company for a while, who had developed that deep domain knowledge, relationships, and bringing in, talent from outside who had experienced, working with different coding languages, working in the cloud, working with various cloud services, has, actually productionalized machine learning models instead of having them, running on a Jupyter notebook. It's bringing that team together and fostering the collaboration there so that they can learn from each other. And I was just using the analogy at lunch. It's kind of like we're in like a 12-legged race. How can we all be like walking together and moving the team in a positive direction without anybody, falling over and getting, too frustrated, right? Like obviously we have our days where people get frustrated, but I think, in the past couple of years we've made good progress and continue to make good progress,
So I'm gonna, I think we have the 1 minute warning, so we get a lightning round. You each get one sentence, and this is a precursor, 1 or 2 sentences maybe, precursor to the next panel after the break, which will be perspectives from the C-suite. So a lightning question, and this is putting them on the spot, so is what one thing would you want your C-suite leaders to know about your experiences or challenges sort of on the front lines of implementing AI in manufacturing and operations? What does a C-suite need to know about key challenges that you face?
I can start.
Yeah.
That also means I can steal everybody else's ideas. So I would say it's so important to kind of balance between sort of the focus on ROI that we talked about, but also that willingness to invest and take risk, right? Like some of these things that we're doing have lead times of 4 or 5 years until you really see the fruits of your labor come to fruition. So being willing to really have the stamina to say, okay, we're really going to invest into a completely new way of collecting our data or analyzing it, because we know in 3 or 4 years that's when we start seeing those dividends. I think that's super important, and sometimes what I wish we had more of was a little bit of that stamina to not just see, okay, the return isn't within 1 year, then it's maybe not a good project.
I would say my biggest thing, there's a book that came out, I think, last year called The Digital Mindset, and the goal of it is kind of bringing the digital teams and the domain experts or SMEs together, and it's kind of like a crash course for those domain experts and SMEs to not be able to code in Python, but to be able to really understand what these models are capable of, what the risks are, because I think as we move forward, it's going to be very important that C-suites are engaged with making those trade-off decisions and understanding the risk, particularly with large language models. So if you don't understand, high level how those work, it can lead to real, I think, compliance and ethical risks in the worst case. But I also think that it can lead to, in kind of the least scary risk, just challenges around understanding the best use case, and even to understanding how much you should be investing to optimize cost around the implementation of these tools.
There's too much to choose from.
One or two sentences.
I would say, yeah, it's just that digitalizing is a cultural change. So, I mentioned we started with the model cell to justify the investment and prioritize. And we got this data that was super helpful to the engineering team to troubleshoot, but it was not fully adopted. And what I realized is, well, this is a model cell that's 3% of the engineering team's time. So until we get it exhaustive, we're not building the habit of what does the data say for all of our things. And so what that means is, there's this cultural shift that we wrote about in the MIMO implementation model, which is You go from, you have a problem, tribal knowledge and experience of what could it be, to first step, what does the data say? And so we really have to get to that critical mass of, say, I don't know what it is, say like 80% of the engineer's time, things that they do have data to assist them where they naturally go, what does the data say, as opposed to their experience and anecdotal knowledge of what's going on.
Let's give a big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you. And back over to Emily to tell us next steps.
All right, everyone, we will take our final break for the day for the next 15 minutes. There are coffee, tea, cookies, and brownies available in the hallway outside the auditorium. Also, please feel free to find our recent grad panelists during the break if you guys have any more questions for them. And let's aim to return around 3:40, and let's try to get started by 3:45.